They thought she was just a schoolteacher. They were wrong. The hangar was silent, unnaturally so. Over 200 students and officers stood in a wide circle, watching one woman in the center shoulders square, eyes unreadable as the senior commander barked his verdict. "Remove your uniform voluntarily," Colonel Gregory Harrison said, "or I'll have security do it for you." There was no trial, no formal charges, just a public shaming dressed in military protocol. The words were cruel, but the smirk said more. Behind him, Brad Whitman, the senator's son and top trainee, chuckled just loud enough to be heard. "Get her a pink beret while you're at it," he muttered. And that was when she moved. Without a word, the woman unpinned the silver wings from her chest and placed them gently on the concrete. Then, with calm hands, she slid off the flight jacket standard issue, plain, worn. Beneath the collar, just for a second, a tattoo flickered into view, a dagger wrapped in wings. No one moved, no one spoke, even Harrison faltered. She placed the jacket next to her wings and simply said, "I'll see you tomorrow." Then she turned and walked out of the hangar, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like gravity itself had shifted. Up on the observation deck, a visiting NATO officer pressed his knuckles to the glass. "That tattoo," he whispered. "Number, it couldn't be." Her name, on paper, was Emily Graves, 35, math teacher, civilian trainee, on base as part of a special program meant to give skilled civilians a path into military aviation. On paper, she was barely qualified. But the thing about paper, it never tells the whole story. Back in Phoenix, Arizona, she lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner, drove a beat-up Honda, taught high school algebra, no social media, no husband, no visible past. Her neighbors thought of her as that quiet lady in 2B who runs at 5:30 every morning like clockwork. They had no idea that Emily once flew aircraft that didn't officially exist. Her apartment was a study in anonymity, blank walls, sparse furniture, a single bookshelf lined with textbooks. Only one thing stood out, a faded photo on the kitchen counter, an aircraft silhouetted against a burning sky. The photo was angled just enough that you couldn't make out the plane, just a sense of speed, of danger, of silence at 30,000 feet. Nobody knew that she'd once held the call sign Spectre. Nobody knew that 10 years ago she disappeared from the world after the death of her younger brother, Captain Ryan Graves, Army aviator, KIA, under circumstances that were never explained and always covered up. She never explained why she gave it all up, never answered when the CIA called, never even opened the letter from the Pentagon offering reinstatement. She chose silence, chose invisibility, chose peace. Until she saw his name again. Colonel Gregory Harrison, formerly Derek Monroe, the man who got her brother killed and tried to do the same to her, had resurfaced. Different name, same ambition. Now he ran a civilian-to-military flight conversion program at Edwards Air Force Base, recruiting under the banner of inclusion and training the best of the best. On paper. Emily knew better. She'd applied using only the hours she logged in civilian aircraft. No combat record, no mention of her real flight hours. She wanted not for glory, but for justice. And so, on the first day of the program, while the other candidates arrived in tailored flight suits and rented Lamborghinis, Emily parked her Honda between a Porsche and a Tesla, carried her one bag, wore no makeup, said nothing. They thought she was just another middle-aged dreamer. Brad Whitman had laughed right in her face. "Lost, ma'am? Cafeteria's that way." She didn't respond, just walked to her seat and opened her notebook not to take notes, but to calculate thrust-to-weight ratios by hand, not because she needed to, but because that's what real pilots do when their hands are itching to fly. She didn't complain when they gave her the worst flight schedules, didn't flinch when the instructors asked her the most complex systems questions during lectures. When her flight simulator kept malfunctioning, she said nothing. And when the technicians whispered that someone had been accessing her profile after hours to sabotage her progress, she smiled. Because she expected it. She didn't fight back. She didn't play their game. She waited. Until the day Harrison called everyone to the hangar and told her to strip. And she did. But not in surrender. No, Emily Graves was just clearing the runway. Because tomorrow, she was going to fly. The next morning, the Mojave sun hadn't even cleared the ridge when something strange happened at Edwards Air Force Base. Every sensor on the flight line picked it up before the human eye could. A sonic ripple, a whisper just under the audible threshold, and then, boom. It wasn't an explosion, it was arrival. The Dassault Rafale streaked across the desert sky like a blade dipped in fire, slicing the morning in half. No markings, just French Air Force livery and a shadow in the cockpit. Then it twisted knife edge, inverted pass, vertical climb band vanished into the blue. People screamed, radios erupted. Colonel Harrison charged toward the control tower demanding answers. "Who authorized this violation?" he barked. But the response came calm and clear. "Edwards Tower to all personnel. Stand down. Allied training in progress. This operation is authorized." And then the voice came through the speakers in the main hangar, crisp, calm, cold. "Edwards Tower, this is Ghost Zero. Request permission for tactical demonstration." Someone dropped a clipboard. Someone else sat down hard. But it was Colonel Harrison's face that told the real story. He'd gone pale. Because he knew that voice. So did a few instructors, veterans, the ones who used to swap stories late at night about the pilot who could disappear into the sky, who flew into storms for fun, who once landed an F-22 without hydraulics, on manual trim and instinct alone. Her call sign had once been Spectre, and now Spectre was back and flying a Rafale that shouldn't have been there. Oh. Up in the air, Emily Graves wasn't thinking about the men below. She wasn't flying to prove anything. She was simply flying. The Rafale responded like it had waited 10 years for her hands. Every loop, every flat spin, every impossible maneuver was done not to impress, but because she missed it. She missed the sky. And yet, every move painted a picture. "You thought I couldn't fly. You thought you could erase me. Watch this." Down on the ground, chaos spread. Brad Whitman stood slack-jawed, watching the aircraft slice the air like a scalpel. "That's not possible," he whispered. "That maneuver, it's classified." Jennifer Blake, one of the few women in the program, and a former commercial pilot, said nothing, but she pulled out her phone, typed in Ghost Zero plus Rafale. Results were blank. No records, no proof, only stories. Meanwhile, Emily's maneuvers escalated one after another. A vertical corkscrew drop that should have torn the wings off, a flat spin descent that hovered at 50 feet before recovery, a cobra stall into a rolling scissor, each one perfectly timed, technically flawless. In the control tower, one instructor muttered, "This isn't a demo, it's a statement." And then came the moment no one could unsee. The Rafale descended to 200 feet, inverted. Emily looked down helmet visor up and saluted. Directly at the hangar. Then she spoke. "Colonel Harrison, or should I say Derek Munro, I know who you are. I know what you did. 10 years ago you sent my brother to die. Today I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to remind you and everyone watching what you tried to erase." There was no anger in her voice, just truth. And truth is heavier than rage. "You told me to take off my uniform. I did. But you forgot something. Some wings can't be taken away." The entire hangar fell into stunned silence. Even the ones who'd mocked her were silent now. Because suddenly, they weren't looking at a middle-aged math teacher. They were looking at a legend in disguise. Back on the ground, instructors and students flooded the runway. Phones out, cameras rolling. This was no longer just a training program. It was a reckoning. The Rafale completed its final maneuver salute to fallen pilots, then climbed one last time toward the sun and disappeared. Moments later, black SUVs pulled up on the flight line. Out stepped General Marcus Ridley, flanked by federal agents. He didn't wait for ceremony. He walked straight up to Harrisono, Monroe, and said, "Derek Monroe, you are under arrest for conspiracy, falsifying official reports, abuse of authority, and contributing to the death of Captain Ryan Graves." As the cuffs snapped shut, Ridley turned to the crowd. Lieutenant Colonel Emily Graves volunteered to return undercover to gather proof of misconduct. What she endured was unacceptable, what she revealed necessary. Let this be a warning, the quiet ones might be legends, and justice, sometimes, comes on wings. Emily didn't wait for applause. She never returned to the hangar. She was already gone. In the days that followed the Rafale flight, Edwards Air Force Base became ground zero for a different kind of shockwave. The internet exploded. Clips of the Rafale slicing the sky flooded TikTok, Reddit, and aviation forums with titles like, "Who is Ghost Zero?" "Mysterious Pilot Humiliates," USAF Brass Live. "The Teacher Who Flew Like a God." Military analysts tried to downplay the event. But pilots knew. They knew what they'd seen wasn't just flying, it was dominance. Controlled, calculated, relentless. Every maneuver from the Rafale display had violated the unspoken limits of what was possible, and redefined them. And then came the reveal. Archived records, redacted reports, and forgotten stories slowly emerged online. Lieutenant Colonel Emily Graves, youngest F-22 pilot in history. 18 confirmed air-to-air kills in classified operations. Survivor of the Ghost mission over Iran. Sole instructor to ever pass the Black Flag Advance program with a perfect score. Vanished after the death of her younger brother, Ryan. People couldn't believe it. The woman who sat alone at the cafeteria. The one everyone mocked during simulations. The one who quietly endured sabotage, isolation, and humiliation was the backbone of American air dominance for a decade. And now she was a high school math teacher. How? Meanwhile, changes rippled through the base like aftershocks. Brad Whitman, the golden boy, found himself face to face with a reality he'd never been taught to process: humility. His father's name couldn't protect him from the fact that he'd tried to tear down a woman whose boots he wasn't qualified to shine. In a rare act of contrition, Brad wrote a public letter. I mocked a legend. I dismissed a warrior. But what she showed us wasn't just that she could fly, it's that she could lead without needing to prove anything. I want to be better because of her, and I will. He requested to transfer to a mentorship program for underprivileged youth interested in aviation. A quiet apology, but a start. Jennifer Blake, the once hesitant peer, found new fire. She requested to return to the flight line as an instructor, promising to build a culture where lifting others up was standard protocol, not sabotage. Even the 3 weakest cadets in the program those Emily had carried in formation during the exercise graduated with honors. They never forgot what it felt like to fly under her command. To feel greatness, not as competition but as guidance. They wore unauthorized patches on their flight suits, a pair of ghostly wings wrapped around a dagger. No one dared ask them to remove it. How? As for Emily, she didn't return to the SkySat, at least not officially. She returned to Desert Ridge High School, where room 214 now held a waiting list of students, eager to study calculus. But something had shifted. Before, students saw Miss Graves as the quiet teacher who never raised her voice. Now, they knew. They didn't know the details, but they sensed the truth. That their teacher had done something impossible. That she had once carried fire across the sky and survived betrayal with silence instead of revenge. The hallway whispers changed from mockery to awe. Even the roughest kids treated her classroom like a sanctuary. Word spread. She doesn't just teach math, she teaches you. And it was true. Because in her class, when someone failed a test, she didn't scold. She'd simply slide a sticky note across their desk that read, "You're thinking too small. Try again, aim higher." The ghost had returned, not to haunt but to teach others how to fly. How? 6 months later, Edwards Air Force Base held a dedication ceremony. A new granite wall rose near the flight line. It wasn't a memorial for combat. It was for the casualties of leadership failure. Ryan Graves' name was etched there. So were 17 others. Emily stood at the back, unnoticed. Civilian clothes, sunglasses, hands folded. But Jennifer Blake spotted her. Now a commissioned instructor herself, Jennifer approached with a small salute. "I've been using your methods in training," she said. "No more screaming, no more one-upmanship, just building people up." Emily smiled. "It's not revolutionary," she replied. "It's just human." How? On their way to the parking lot, a nervous young woman in uniform stepped forward, barely 20, lieutenant's bar on her collar, hope in her eyes. "Ma'am, are you? Ghost?" Emily opened her mouth to deflect, but something in the girl's eyes stopped her. "Yes," she said softly. "I used to be." The young pilot exhaled. "You saved me. I was about to give up. Thought I didn't belong. But when I saw what you did up there..." She swallowed. "You reminded me the sky doesn't care about politics or prejudice, just precision and heart." Emily touched the woman's wings gently. "Then fly true, Lieutenant. And when someone tries to clip your wings, remember they can take your uniform, your title, even your aircraft, but they can't take the sky from your soul." A year after the Rafale flight, the world had moved on. But Emily Graves hadn't packed. She still ran every morning at 5:30, 10 miles through the quiet streets of Phoenix. The same rhythm, the same breath, the same silence. But now, sometimes, she ran beside others. Jennifer Blake often joined her, not as a student, not as a follower, but as a peer. One morning, Jennifer spoke while they cooled down at the edge of the park trail. "They offered you a command position again, didn't they?" Emily didn't answer right away. She bent to stretch, her fingers brushing the pavement. "I told them no." Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "You're the best pilot the Air Force has ever seen. You could be reshaping the entire next generation." "I am reshaping them," Emily said. Just not in a hangar, in a classroom, one equation at a time. Oh. At Desert Ridge High School, room 214 had become something of a legend. Students no longer feared math because of what they couldn't do, they approached it with curiosity because of what they might discover. And in subtle ways, Emily taught them more than variables and functions. She taught them resilience. She taught them clarity under pressure. She taught them what it meant to fly true even when the world told you didn't belong in the sky. Her class pass rate on the AP Calculus exam was now 100% unprecedented for a Title I school. But no one talked about that as much as the little handwritten notes she gave students who struggled. You're not behind. You're just building strength where others took shortcuts. This is turbulence. You'll stabilize. Fly again. Oh. One afternoon, as she graded papers late into the evening, a knock came at the classroom door. It was General Marcus Ridleynott in uniform, but still carrying the posture of command. He sat at a student desk, awkward in the too small chair. "I came to thank you," he said. "Not just for what you exposed, but for what followed." 15 officers had been discharged. Dozens of command practices re-evaluated. A new ethics training program launched, using pieces of Emily's simulator debriefs and journal notes as core curriculum. "You redefined what leadership looks like," he told her. She shook her head. "I just followed the example of someone who never made it home." He understood. Then he handed her a sealed envelope. "The President wants to award you the Medal of Honor. For Syria. For the Black Hawk rescue in Afghanistan. For everything." She took the envelope and pushed it back across the desk. "With all respect, sir, I decline." Ridley wasn't surprised. "May I ask why?" Emily smiled, soft, quiet. "Because medals are for people who need the world to see them. I just needed to know I didn't disappear for nothing." Oh. Instead, she accepted a different offer. 2 weeks a year consulting with the Air Force Academy. No rank, no command, just curriculum design, teaching not just how to fly, but how to lead. "No more Colemans," she'd said. "No more silence," Ridley replied. Oh. On the anniversary of the Rafale flight, a memorial plaque was unveiled at Edwards. It bore no rank, no medals, no histories, just a single phrase etched in titanium. "Some wings can't be taken away." Emily didn't attend the ceremony, but later that evening, as the desert sunset flared gold and crimson, she stood in her backyard garden with a cup of tea, listening to a distant roar in the sky. She smiled, not because she missed flying, but because she knew someone else was up there now, flying differently because of her. Oh. In room 214, a student had scribbled something at the bottom of their calculus test. "Miss Graves, math used to scare me. Now I think it's just like flying. You trust the logic, and the rest follows. Thank you for teaching me how to fly." Emily circled the message with her red pen and wrote in the margin, "You always had wings. I just helped you unfold them." Oh. And maybe that's the point. Not every warrior wears armor. Not every leader shouts. Sometimes, the most powerful people in the world are the ones who show us who we can become without ever needing us to see who they were. Because the sky doesn't remember those who flew the highest. It remembers those who lifted others to fly beside them.